Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Powers. I am an independent regulatory consultant in the medical device space. I was told to give a little bit of information about my background. Studied back in the day biomedical engineering and started working in R&D in the medical device area and found my way into regulatory affairs. We'll talk a little bit more about how I define regulatory affairs in a while, but work with small and mid-sized medical device companies on their FDA submission work and sometimes their international submissions as well.
Okay, there we go. You guys can hear me. So hello, everyone. I'm Sherry Ferrugia. I started my career in digital health, health IT, as an entrepreneur, and I started a couple of companies and did consulting after that, and then moved 12 years ago to Georgia Tech, and I've been at Georgia Tech for 12 years now. On campus, I was previously the Chief Operating and Strategy Officer for the Pediatric Technology Center, and 2 years ago, I moved over to a Georgia Tech affiliate, which is the Global Center for Medical Innovation, as the CEO.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Greg Martin. I'm a clinician at Emory University, a pulmonary and critical care physician by training. My interests and career are really mostly around clinical research, patient-oriented research, particularly in innovation, new diagnostics, and I help to run a testing center, innovation testing center, particularly for point of care and over-the-counter tests, and have been working the last couple of years in a lot of COVID testing.
Tariana Stewart, so I got my PhD from Morehouse School of Medicine, and that's where I first learned about intellectual property. So I actually ended up working for a few law firms, drafting patent applications, and then I went over to Georgia Tech as a technology licensing associate within the tech transfer office. And I'll talk more about tech transfer office and how that can affect research, which is how I got to know Sherry. So I hope you guys are connecting the dots here. And so now I'm actually with IBM Research and that intellectual property group licensing core AI. So again, I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but sometimes I step into panels and sessions not knowing exactly what it means. So I always like to make sure we're all working on the same baseline here. So MedTech innovation and collaboration, MedTech meaning the medical technology industry and the products that are produced out of that. Products meaning anything from large medical equipments like MRIs to small implantable devices. And all of us on this panel at a certain point have been in the R&D cycle of taking early concept medical devices and bringing them to fruition all the way down to what Grace does on the regulatory affairs part. So again, collaboration is connecting the right dots with each other. So all of us here expertise in our own area of the healthcare field. And so successful medical innovation really requires a process of co-creation among key stakeholders, which is what Grace, Sherry, and Greg are involved in. So Greg, I'm first going to start with you. Please provide both successful and unsuccessful examples of this co-creation process. And for those of you that don't know too much about Greg, which maybe some of you do, he had the wonderful opportunity working with Wilbert Lamb and fast-tracking COVID-19 diagnostic testing. And so I would really love for you to talk about, you had to work with Georgia Tech, Emory, CHOA, NIH.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Co-creation is certainly often grows from the clinical need, and obviously, at least from my perspective, that's probably the most important place to start, but it also ends up being a necessary collaboration because no one can do it alone, and particularly in a traditional university environment like I'm in at Emory University, we find partners, particularly at Georgia Tech and also at Children's Healthcare, sort of this ecosystem that allows us to work together to develop new ideas, find the clinical need or the clinical niche, find partners who can help in either the invention, the creation, the idea stage, all the way through the prototyping and testing and other things. So Tariana mentioned that a couple of programs that we run, I'll back up maybe one step and talk just for a minute about a center that we run. So there's a center that we run that's supported by NIH, but it's called the Atlanta Center for Microsystems Engineered Point of Care Technologies. You can abbreviate that and call it ACME, P-O-C-T, or ACME. ACME's purpose really is to try and help inventors and new technologies to make it further along in their technology level so that they're advancing towards making it to market, being successful, And it's all the things that we're going to be talking about. It's the clinical need, it's the technology development, it's the clinical validation, it's the regulatory strategy, it's all those pieces together. That all started for us several years ago, but you can imagine a couple of years ago, things changed a lot for us. So COVID came along, and for us, because we're an NIH-funded center, the federal government asked us to try and step in and help with bringing tests to market. As you probably, if you go back a couple of years and think about COVID coming along and whether you were able to go out and find a test or be tested, a lot of times that wasn't easy. And so we realized, we being the world, realized that that was a need. So the government set up a new program called RADx, the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics Program, and tapped us, mostly because of our collaboration, the ability that we had across Emory, Georgia Tech, and Children's to do the technology assessments, look at the engineering perspective, look at the clinical need, identify the market, but also test in a clinical setting in adults and children and within various communities where we've done that. And I can talk more about that, but we've seen over the last couple of years more than 100 different tests. A lot of the tests that you now find in your local pharmacy are the ones that we've seen and tested and worked on. And there certainly are some that work better than others. You probably have seen that, right? Some are easier than others, some are better, particularly for people who may have different either manual dexterity, different vision, other things that make some easier than others. Some are faster than others, some are more sensitive than others. But overall, one of the things that we've learned is that it really ends up being a combination of collaboration. So us working with the team, and particularly in collaboration with NIH, with FDA, and with the entire sort of ecosystem of partners here in Atlanta, and then not only being independent in our assessments, but working with the inventors to try and understand their technology so that we can do both the independent and accurate assessment, but also facilitate it and make it better in the long run.
Anyone else want to add in? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Greg.
Did a great
That was great. You said one point in working with inventors, and we're going to switch topics a little bit. There's a whole step with working with like universities when it comes to innovation, and that's starting with what you call a tech transfer office at most universities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in case if you guys aren't familiar with that. So any institution that has some research facility has what you call a tech transfer, which is mainly what universities call that. So that's where if you are a clinician like Greg working at Emory or a researcher engineer working at Georgia Tech, whether you know it or not, even when you're a student and all of your packets, when you're super excited joining, the workforce, there's a piece of paper that you sign that says, hey, by the way, all of your intellectual property, all the research you're doing on campus or where I'm at IBM, the tech transfer office owns it. And that can always be a shock sometimes when you get to the point to where you are in the lab and you create this like really awesome like medical device or implant or something like that, and you're like, I want to commercialize it. I want to go to GCMI. I want to do something with this. And sometimes there can be a little confusion, and that's where it's very important about having collaborations very, very early on. And so maybe Sherry, you and I can bounce back and forth with this. And we could probably talk about this forever on collaboration with the tech transfer office.
Yeah, that's probably an entirely panel on its own. But one of the things that Tariana and I, when she was at Georgia Tech, talked a lot about was bringing, tech transfer, which, really in today's world is more of an innovation office.
Right.
I mean, it really is. It's an enabler of innovation, bringing them in as early as possible. And I see some of my colleagues here from the Pediatric Technology Center, and we did just that. Mm-hmm. We were given someone in the office of tech transfer and licensing, and we brought that person in to our monthly meetings and discussed what innovation was on the horizon, where we were, had it been published, had it not been published.
I'll get into that a little bit later on too, what publications.
That's a whole other conversation. But also, even, is the patent viable? Should we even file a patent? And I think more important than that is, what did the faculty member want to do? Mm-hmm. And I, what I recognized early on was that it was extraordinarily important to engage the faculty member in that process early on as well.
Right.
It wasn't just about engaging the tech transfer office, because you may have a faculty member who's like, I really do want to spin out and start a company. Or, you know what, I just want to license this and I want to keep working in a lab. So it was about serving and supporting faculty as much as it was about really understanding what the process was. And through that, we were able to see a smoother pathway to commercialization, and the result of that was, getting something to the bedside.
Right.
So I think that's ultimately the goal, but it was definitely a learning process for us, and there were times when it's, well, you can't file a patent, but let's see if you have the freedom to operate anyway.
Right.
So there's a lot of different ways to approach it to where you can advance that innovation and get to the path of commercialization. It's not just one.
And from someone on the other end working in the tech transfer office, I can't tell you how many times I've had faculty come to me be like, oh, I already found funding. I've already done this, and I've already done this with the product. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, our office doesn't even know that this exists. And so maybe, Greg, you can chime in on this. I mean, as a faculty member, in an ideal situation, right, if we lived in a perfect world, like, what would that communication look like between faculty members, tech transfer, and other members of the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's really hard, and I hear what Sherry and Tariana are saying, because in a university, you've always got faculty who are engaged in research, and it may not be basic discovery lab research,
Right.
It might be research in some other innovation, maybe educational platforms, or something else that could really be generalizable or be a product. But there's a chasm between what faculty are doing and what the OTT office would know that they're doing, right? So OTT, the Office of Tech Transfer, has all these abilities to help and innovate and allow them to understand the ecosystem and what's going to happen. Everything from, well, you signed this when you came in, but also we've got resources to try and help you, and there may be things you want to do earlier or later and things you need to be aware of. The faculty may not even know that. So it's really hard, because the Office of Tech Transfer doesn't necessarily know who to reach out to. They may not be able to reach out to the thousands of faculty at every university. And the faculty don't know to reach out to the tech transfer office because they're not aware even of what they're inventing. They may not realize that it has potential or they haven't thought that far ahead. They're just thinking about it as a tool that they're developing for their own use.
Right, right.
Well, and I really think that's, at least from my perspective today at GCMI, it's where we start to bring in, it's not just the Office of Tech Transfer, it's regulatory. And for us, a really important piece is, we're heavy on the compliance side, which is the process side, but it's Grace who we reach out to, and we want that regulatory expert to be at arm's length to really help guide, not just faculty, but us as well. And so, Grace, I'd love it if you, here, I'm being a moderator for a second.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Sherry, it's fine.
I'm sorry, I'm
Like, I can
always
feel
the
it.
moderator, guys, and it's just really hard to break away from that.
Well, I was going to save Grace
you
for
would talk to us a
last, but
little
go ahead.
So one of the pieces that we were talking about this as we were preparing for the panel is how my piece is further down the line. So I always say to an inventor or to GCMI or whomever I'm working with, you need to know who you are or what your device is before you come talk to me, right? So you've gone to the tech transfer office, you've kind of figured out some of the basics, or you have found experts that can help you figure out, what you want your device to be, and then come to me where I can do a little bit of the work on what I call the regulatory affairs side. So one of the things that I was tasked with is kind of explaining what that is, because we all hear the word compliance in every sort of industry that we work in, certainly in the healthcare space. So to me, I don't actually work in compliance. So I work related to the product specifically, not to the process to develop it, not to the process to sell or market or build or manufacture. I work on an individual product. So medical devices, at least in the United States and most geographies, are classified in different areas that drive what requirements you have to do. So based on risk overall, risk to the user, risk to the patient, things along those lines. So my piece of the puzzle is taking that individual product, that device, when you know who you are and what you want to say about it, what is your user, what's your user need, what's your intended use, the purpose of this device. I can't really assess a platform. It has to be something specific. And looking at that to understand that classification and what FDA work may be required. Do you need a clinical study? Are you a medical device? Are you this classification? That drives what you have to do from the development process as well as the compliance process overall. So GCMI holds the system to be able to develop, to be able to process medical devices. I work on that individual piece of it.
But really quickly, Sherry, can you talk about like the system within GCMI, like what Grace is referring to?
Yeah, so she's referring to the quality system.
Okay.
And I'm certainly not a quality system expert, but I did spend the night in a Holiday Inn last night, so I'll talk a bit about it. So the quality system is basically, to oversimplify, is just checking the boxes.
Okay.
That you've done everything that you need to do to ensure the safety of this product. But where there's a lot of confusion, and it's not just with faculty, I don't want this to be so academic focused, but we see this with entrepreneurs and startups as well, who we work with, and we will take them through the qualities. We'll put a quality system in place. They have a documentation system, so everything's been documented, everything's been tested appropriately. Let's just say they've even gone through the packaging and the sterilization of the product, and they think they're ready to go.
Right.
And we're like, no, that's the compliance side. And so it's extremely important for any entrepreneurs out in the audience today, to really understand that, there is a regulatory aspect that, if not embraced and not, brought in early, can cost you literally hundreds of, that could be millions of dollars because you got to start over. We've seen this in academia. Greg's going, yep. But we also see it with young entrepreneurs and young startup companies as well. There's not a lot of money out there, and coming from the pediatric side, there's even less money, and it's just tragic when that happens. So one of the things that we all talked about earlier is being a resource, whether it's to students, to faculties, or entrepreneurs, to just pick up the phone and call someone to try to understand really what the overall process is, so that the use of funds are not they're not diminished by the time you get to compliance and regulatory.
I think it's so important to emphasize that we are all a piece of the puzzle, but there are many pieces associated with it. Like tech transfer and I are not gonna, any combination, we need all of us and our responsibilities and more to be able to get an appropriate product to market. So I've had inventors that have come to just me and just say, oh, I need an FDA approval. And I'm like, well, you need a lot of other areas besides me to get there. And then other people that skip out on me and say, well, I'm compliant. I have an IRB approval and I did everything the university required. And it's like, well, that's not enough from the actual commercialization side.
And one other thing I might add, and it's telling you something you already know, which is that most innovation fails, right? You identify a problem, you think about a solution, and somewhere along that long pathway from the first, eureka moment to where at the end you have something that's usable in the market, there's so many steps. And part of what I think we all realize is that you don't want to have something that makes you fail because of something you simply didn't know. Right? If you can put all the pieces together and have the people in the process, it makes it much more likely to succeed. That doesn't mean you're inevitably going to. Still, a lot of innovation fails, but it at least eliminates some of the things that are unnecessary failures.
Well, and I think what it comes down to is that if I look back 12 years ago, a lot of what we were doing was in silos. And I think the fact that we're all three sitting up here today, and I think about the successes that we've had working together, it speaks to a really different level of collaboration than it's not traditional collaboration, is what I'm saying, right? It's collaboration squared. It's exponentially harder,
Yeah.
It is. It's exponentially harder. It's exponentially more difficult, and it takes a lot of effort. But we've been successful doing it, and I'm proud of that.
And putting all those pieces together is truly a little bit unique,
Yeah.
right? And it's one of the things is having the ecosystem, but part of it's also the culture, right?
is
Which
the
supports
culture.
innovation, but also puts the people and the processes in place so that you can be successful doing that.
Well, Greg, you said a key word, culture environment. And it's really interesting. So coming from academia to industry now at IBM Research, one of the first thing I noticed is oh, IBM wants to make money, right? So the researchers just have a different mindset. So when they're innovating, it's because they already have a client in mind. They already know who they potentially want to license this to. So it's just, it's a different mentality. Which could be different in academic setting. I always say is research for the greater good, but at a certain point we have to innovate. And so what is the right, and Greg, you can talk about, and probably all of us can talk about this, but what is the right cultural environment within a university setting or a basic academic setting that encourages not only collaboration among faculty members, but faculty members to want to reach out to a tech transfer office. I'm going to put my tech transfer office back on because don't forget about us. To reach out to a GCMI to drive innovation. And I'm going to take it a step further. So my light bulb moment at IBM, I was these researchers don't have a tenure track, right? Because at the end, with academics, that's what you're focused on. And the reason why this is important is when your tenure is publish. So when you have someone like Greg, or even though you're at at Georgia Tech, but if you submit an invention disclosure, the first thing I'm doing is I'm Googling Greg Martin, the innovation in PubMed, and more than likely you're probably going to have 10 publications. But why is that important? Now we can't file a patent because that's public disclosure. And if I can't file a patent, there's no IP. That means there's nothing to license. You're probably less likely of having funding. So it's crucial, right? And so I want you to talk more on that. How can we,
Yeah, there's this historical tension, and I think you hit on it exactly. So there's the historical tension at universities who the faculty are there for their career, and their career success is defined by publications and grants and things that they're producing because that's the process by which they succeed and move up the ladder. They go through promotion and tenure processes, and those require that you disclose your work and you publish it and you're successful, and those are the metrics that define success. But as Tariana just said, in some cases, by doing that, you're hampering your own success, particularly if you're working in innovation and truly creation. And that's where the other tension is not just at the faculty level, but it's really the tension and maybe the culture of the university, which is very historically for innovation and to create generalizable knowledge, right? We're here to do research for the greater good, and we historically, in many places, in almost all universities, have a culture that says we should be doing research and discovery and new innovation to try and generate knowledge that's good for everyone and put it out in the public domain and make it usable for everyone. And in many ways, that's great, and we are certainly getting more towards what people call research reproducibility and putting the data and the other information out there so that people can ensure that that work is good. But as Tariana just said, if you're doing real new discovery, particularly something that might be intellectual property or other sort of true product, you have to be very careful. And that's where it becomes going back to how do we get faculty to be aware of that when they're at the earliest stages of conception of the idea, and how does the Office of Tech Transfer know that that faculty is thinking about something?
Right.
They can't read everyone's mind, so they have to know how do we get this message out there. And it really is a culture shift because there's some movement away from, oh, we're only just here for true research and discovery. We want to be able to also create and produce new things that are going to help.
Well, it's what does the university want to be known for? IBM, we have a CEO, so he pretty much tells us, we're going to focus in quantum computing, AI, and hybrid cloud. Researchers, this is what you're doing, and make sure it can be in a nice, pretty bow so that we can license it and sell it to somebody else so that we can generate revenue. There really isn't, we're not getting that type of message from the top down from universities. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's a matter of What do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for innovating? Do you want to encourage faculty members to, disrupt the technology? So,
Right. And historically, one other thing I would
Yeah.
add to what you said is that historically, faculty and universities are encouraged to discover, and what you see more often than not is that once they've been at the cutting edge and they've done the discovery, then they're like, well, that was nice.
Right.
I'll move on to something else.
Right.
And it's like,
And-
but
yeah.
you're onto something here.
yeah, keep on going.
And so
Please
that's
keep on going.
exactly what I was going to, yes, is that you can innovate to death.
Right.
Okay, and that doesn't mean that it's ever going to reach the bedside. It's not going to ever reach the general population. And so everyone talks about innovate, innovate, innovate. Well, okay, that's great. Now what?
Right.
And you referred to it as discover, right? And if you could discover and then take it, and that entire process is really innovating. So. At the same time, there is now, a continued movement. This isn't new for, academia to work with industry, but the culture hasn't changed
Right.
to embrace that. There's, a few of us who've done enough backflips to make that happen, but it's still, you're still working in an environment that is mostly about discovery. And is not nimble, doesn't, work at the speed of industry. And so
Which industry works really fast, by the way.
yeah, I mean, I came
Because
from.
we
I
have
mean, when I-
deadlines and quarters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when I started at Georgia Tech and I constantly used the word, the term ROI, and the EVPR called me in and said, you got to stop it. You're scaring people. They don't even know what you mean. And then I found that there's this wonderful world out there where you can write things on paper and people might give you money. It's called grants. And when I learned, and tremendous expertise goes into this. I couldn't write a grant if you had a gun in my head. There's no way. It's certainly an expertise. But now you've got to take that expertise and somehow move it into again, like you said, that general population, and part of a big way that you're going to get it to the general population is, partnering with industry. So we do have to become, more nimble. We have to have a culture of what is the problem and how we're going to solve it, not I have this thing, do you have a problem that this will work for? Can I solve, we can't, we have to focus on, what's keeping our industry leaders up at night, how we can solve those problems, how we can innovate along the way, but how we can commercialize and get it into the general population. And that's still very much an uphill battle. I think that in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia, we've done a tremendous job. When you sit here and you think we have a lot of work to do, and then you go outside the state and you're like, holy cow, we are way ahead of a lot of people, even though we still have a lot of work to do. But culture doesn't change overnight.
No.
It doesn't even change in a couple of years. Nope. It's going to be, it continues to be a very slow process, but everyone in this room has to work towards, whether you're in industry, whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether you're in academia. We all have that responsibility as innovators to push past that and to get something to the general population. So that's not just our responsibility. It's not just Emory's responsibility or Georgia Tech's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, and I feel like on the university side, everybody, professors in particular, are just such strong, natural educators, right? They're going to tell you about what they're doing. They're going to explain what they're doing. On our side, the industry side, I mean, we do need to do a better job educating the universities on what the industry setting is like and what's required there and how they can contribute. I mean, I work in regulatory affairs. I had an undergraduate degree, a master's degree. Nobody ever told me that this profession even existed. I didn't know there were submissions to the FDA when I was in school. Some pretty basic things that I think if there was an understanding of the process that industry goes through, that there could probably be stronger collaborations in between industry and universities.
Well, that's actually transitioning to the next point. My next question is best practices on how research institutions can work with industry. At IBM, we love what we call joint development collaborations or joint development agreements, because we're particularly good at one thing, we're not good at everything, so it works really well to partner with other institutions or research institutions or other industries. But there's a couple of steps beforehand that we were saying that like researchers and labs need to best prepare themselves to work with industry. So if you guys want to take a stab on that, on best practices.
So I guess one example I would point to is our experience with the COVID testing world. So at least in that space, this is different because it's in the midst of a public health pandemic, and that changes everything from like how quickly people can work, even universities.
Right.
But we don't change culture overnight. That's certainly true. But when you can align goals and needs, and again, the pandemic made things a bit different, but we went from having a relatively small group of people with a lot of capabilities to a much larger system because our universities and our healthcare systems all recognized the public need of having COVID tests and what was being asked of us, and said, okay, we're not going to not do the things we're required to do. We still have to have an Office of Tech Transfer and look at things and sign contracts and have rules about the way we do it. But we're going to work together, and we're going to do it literally hand in hand. So Emory and Georgia Tech working together in all the funding, all the regulatory decisions, the Office of Tech Transfer predominantly at Emory looking at everything and really developing a master process so that as we're going through tens and even 100 or more evaluations, we can do that really quickly and we can make it efficient. And we developed all the scientific process for it and the publication process for it. So it's almost like a micro culture change, the microcosm of sort of how you would change culture, what you might like it to be in the future. But everyone was aligned at the same place. We all said, this is where we need to go. This is the need. We can see the way to get there. We just need to break down some of the historical barriers to do it. And some of those are things that often just are communication and time that it takes to execute the normal processes. But we now realize that some of those are unnecessary. When we look at the amount of time it takes to go from conception to a product to market, I mean, over the pandemic, you're seeing things that arrived on the market, everything from vaccines to testing to drugs in a very short period of time.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said alignment. During the pandemic, we were aligned.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of conversation around how do we maintain that trajectory? Because, and I remember it like it was yesterday. We were working on some things at GCMI. And and of course, I start to feel uncomfortable because I'm like, I know that I'm probably stepping over the line here a little bit. And I picked up the phone and called my boss, and he said, just do it. Well, I can tell you, that doesn't happen in academia. No one says to you, just do it, okay? That's what my boss in industry used to say to me. And it was music to my ears. It was, the U.S. needs this. We are aligned on what the mission is. Just do it. Well, now, that was a very uncomfortable place for a lot of people. And so now we're back to, and I see it, where it's like, well, maybe not just do it, maybe let's just start very carefully, let's take our time. And I think it comes back to where we weren't, that maybe what we're working on today, we're not all aligned on. So it is a challenge. We know that we can do it. We know that we can not just innovate, but we can commercialize, that we can get product to market very quickly. It's that there are a lot of roadblocks that were removed for us during the pandemic that are back in place today.
Right.
Culture.
Anyone else there? Oh.
Yeah, I echo all of that, and then reemphasize the education piece just to get the two groups closer on the same page.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're not alone in the sense that we've all done things differently during the pandemic, and some of the things we're like, we want to preserve, right?
Yeah,
we learn
absolutely.
something, we realize that there's a different way to do something, and it's better or more effective, or right? So now universities who are not nimble, curmudgeonly kind of institutions, and they can hopefully look at it and say, wait, maybe we don't need to go through the 73 steps that we normally would use, right? There's maybe a better way to do that.
Just 70. I'll take it. I also think, Greg, the one thing that I saw during the pandemic, because there was that just do it attitude, was that even with the isolation and even with the stress, that morale went up for us because we were doing something good. We saw the fruits of our labor very quickly. And I'm referring to the fact that, GCMI is about medical device commercialization, but we pivoted during, COVID and, delivered, almost $4 million face shields to the U.S., primarily funded through a FEMA grant. And it was a tremendous amount of work. It was something that would have never happened in a, pre-pandemic, environment. And I saw what you all did. You tested how many kits? How many tests?
Well, we've got a biobank of about 30,000 samples and way more than 10,000 people tested. So
Yeah,
a lot.
a lot.
It's throughout the community of Georgia.
And, and we were constantly talking to Grace about, is the FDA going to let us do this? How much do we have to ask the FDA? Are they going to say, yeah, go? Are they going to say, no, go? Because it changed for you as well.
Right, they were probably the most nimble I've ever seen. We're almost back to the original ways, but there's still some of that
Yeah.
that'll hopefully carry over.
So hopefully we can, whether it's, 73 steps or 70 or 65, hopefully we can, continue to just press on and forward, and remove some of those barriers. Continue to be successful.
So we officially cannot do a Q&A, but we can end this a little bit early, and we can stick around if you
Yeah,
guys
of course.
do want to come up to us individually. But thank you, panelists. This was
Thank you,
great.
Taria.
Thank you all.
Thanks.